The role of nuclear power is unclear with regard to supplying electricity and mitigating greenhouse gas emissions. It's really in play. And the reason why is the current generation of large reactors are not doing very well. Not many are being built. They're very, very expensive. They are expensive not only to build, but now they're expensive to operate. Because of this, the nuclear industry has pretty much admitted this, which is quite astonishing. And they have argued that they will get around the problems or difficulties of the large reactors by coming up with small reactors. Now, we haven't seen any of the new generation of small reactors come online yet. They are what they would describe as paper reactors. But the question arises, should we heavily invest as a government or governments in this next generation of small modular reactors or not? I am not going to tell you what the answer is to that question, but I will try to give you a Michelin guide on how you can figure out what the answer might be to your own satisfaction. So why don't we proceed? It is reasonably important in the energy budget. I want to say that it's the largest budget item in the energy budget now with regard to research, development, and support. So, you know, and if you count other countries, they put it in a very prominent place as well, nuclear energy. So why don't we begin? Let's go to the first slide. Okay, what are we going to try to answer? Why are today's large power reactors encountering difficulties competing against non-nuclear alternatives? Why might small reactors do better, and why might they fall short? Next slide. Those are the three things we're going to focus on. Okay, to answer those questions, we need to understand that to be competitive in the context of a reactor, it's got to be more economical and pose no greater safety risks than their non-nuclear alternatives. And they should, at least whatever new designs they are, not increase the risk of existing nuclear weapons proliferation risks. I think that one is a very generous softball. I mean, I think they ought to reduce the risk, but we're using a very generous criteria here, at least not increase it. Okay, so those are the three hurdles to be determine whether or not any reactor, large or small, would be competitive against non-nuclear generators of electricity. Those would be the three hurdles. So let's go to the brief answers as to what the state of play is with regard to large reactors. I think, in a nutshell, large reactors actually just fail to meet all three criteria for competitiveness. You know, they are in fact a proliferation risk. They do in fact present safety problems in comparison to non-nuclear alternatives, and no, they are not economically competitive against non-nuclear alternatives. So then the question occurs, well, what about the small reactors? Why might they do better? Well, several reasons. They're cheaper because they're smaller. There's not as much to build, and so it costs less to build one. They can use more passive safety systems than the larger systems, larger reactors do. Because they're smaller, they release less radioactivity in an accident. And because they're smaller, they produce less nuclear weapons materials than larger reactors. Okay, well, why might they fall short? Well, they may not actually enjoy economies of scale, both with regard to the amount of electricity they produce, given the cost, but also the assumption is that these things will become very cheap because they're modular, and you can make them in factories, and you're going to make lots of them. And when you make lots of them, you enjoy what's called an economy of scale. We'll get into this. It's kind of like if you mass produce a car, the cost of the car per unit comes down after you make a lot of them. but they may not enjoy that economy for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is we may not make many of them, and they may not be all that cheap per unit.
Professor Sokolski, I have a question.
Sure.
How much power does a typical
That's a
small?
good question. I should have actually explained that. Thank you for interrupting.
Sure.
I shouldn't say interrupting, for saving me from being incoherent. The rule of thumb is that a small reactor is several hundred megawatts, generally less than 300. Sometimes you hear people go as high as 500. 500 is a really big machine in my book, so I like the argument that it's 300 or less, but we'll get into that. Big reactors now range from as small as around 800 megawatts electrical to as high as, I think the largest thing out there is around 1,650 or thereabouts megawatts electrical. So you can see that the small reactor is roughly 1/3 to 1/5 or 1/5 the size of the large reactor. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry I didn't explain that. We'll see pictures shortly of these things with the ratings, so it may get easier as I go along, but it was an important thing to clarify. Okay, they will be risky if they're located near cities. And one of the sale points of the small modular reactors is, oh, we can be close to the customer, and that means being near cities or in cities. And the advanced small modular reactors, well, they are actually designs that I think would increase nuclear weapons proliferation risk, even over the ones we currently have.